So welcome to today's session, which is about enhancing your publication strategy with Altmetrics data and tools. Thanks very much for joining us. We hope you find this session interesting and useful for what you're trying to do with the data. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you do have any questions through the session, please pop them in the question box. We'll have time at the end where we'll try to answer as many of them as possible. Let us know if you can't hear or see. Hopefully we won't have any problems, but if we do, we'll do what we can to fix it. And this webinar will be recorded, so please do feel free to share it with colleagues afterwards. It's a good job I said that because I've just remembered I need to push record. Oh, it's going, all good. So it's definitely being recorded. So if you want to catch up afterwards, you'll be able to. On the webinar today, you have myself. I'm Kat. I'm the COO at Altmetric. I'm joined by Sara Grimme, who works with us at Digital Science. And Sara has a lot of experience of working really closely with publishers. So we're really pleased to have her joining us today. And in terms of what we'll cover, we'll start with a quick introduction to Altmetrics. We'll talk through using Altmetrics to guide your editorial strategy and how you can use them as a tool for attracting new authors. After that, we'll look at how they can be used to help maximize the reach and influence of your content. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So with that, we will get started. Altmetrics, why and what? I think most of us are aware that these days researchers are really much more accountable to many more audiences than they have been in the past. Research is no longer just published and disseminated amongst small niche audiences within an institution or within a particular discipline. It's now available much more widely, especially thanks to initiatives like open access, funder mandates, and other initiatives that have gone on to help disseminate the findings of particularly publicly funded research much more broadly. So where once papers might have been shared over email or as PDFs with just your colleagues, now they're accessed by a huge range of people who might be talking about it or interpreting it in lots of different ways. And one of the other things that has kind of prompted the rise of this thing that we know today as Altmetrics is the fact that traditional metrics weren't necessarily very good at reflecting the kind of engagement that was happening around publications as soon as they were published. Traditional metrics such as citations tend to be quite slow to accrue, taking even a few years to start to appear. So you went a long time without really knowing how a piece of research was being received. Altmetrics, in contrast, as you'll see later, are much more immediate and can help you get a much better idea sooner. So Altmetrics are all about really reflecting that broader engagement around a piece of published research. And when I say research, that could be a journal article, a book, a data set, an image, anything that's hosted online and has a unique identifier. And what we're aiming to do is to help to pull together that academic attention, so whether it's citation counts, the count of the number of publications someone has published, for example, the things that we recognize as more traditional bibliometrics, with the broader attention that publications see today in online news reports, in references from policymakers, on social media, so platforms such as Facebook and Twitter, but also in places like Wikipedia, online reference managers, and various other outlets where research is mentioned and shared around the world every day. So Altmetrics, in a nutshell, are indicators of online engagement that complement traditional citation impact metrics. They're not intended as a replacement, they're there to help you tell a broader story. And what they can really do is help you understand who is engaging. So I mentioned some of the sources that we've tracked already, but they can help you see discussions on post-publication peer review platforms. They can show you where a piece of research is being referenced in Wikipedia, so where it's really contributing to that broader public understanding of how, on a particular topic perhaps, or how a field is evolving. Commentary on social media, which I think a lot of people associate mainly with Altmetrics, although they extend far beyond that. Coverage in news media and blogs, so whether that's press releases that are syndicated or more original news reports that look into a specific topic or an emerging field, and blogs which perhaps offer a more informed opinion on what's being said in the research. Citations in non-journal sources, so for example on Wikipedia, and engagement on scholarly platforms such as expert reviews on F1000. And so what Altmetrics do is track mentions from all of those sources and tie them back to the research output that they're about. And when we talk about altmetrics being much more immediate, this graph gives you a sense of really the kind of trends that we tend to see in the data. So as soon as a research publication is released online, you might start to see tweets about it. If it's been press released, you might start to see news outlets picking it up very quickly. Literally as soon as it has gone online, that often happens. People will start to bookmark and share it on other scholarly and social networks. And then as time goes on, people begin to read, comment, blog about it once they've had a chance to form an opinion perhaps. Wikipedia articles often actually very quickly these days get updated with new references. And then later on down the line, you might see it featured as a research highlight in somewhere like F1000 or cited by policy documents. And actually, since this graph was created, Altmetric now also tracks patterns. So similarly to how you might see a piece of research having an influence in policy, you might also see how it's beginning to potentially have an economic impact through its application in patents. And the really important thing to remember about altmetrics is that they aren't just quantitative. So yes, they can tell you how many times an article has been tweeted or how many news stories have written about it, but they can also help you see exactly what people are saying and who those people are. We try to make the data as transparent as possible so that you can really get the important parts from it that can help you understand who's engaging with your research and why. So how is all this data useful? We get asked this a lot, and of course there are many different ways that it can be applied. Today's researchers face many challenges, not least getting their work seen and read. Altmetrics can help them to find potential collaborators, to attract new funding by providing new examples of how their work is having an influence and making a difference. It can also help them decide where to publish, which perhaps is particularly pertinent for you as journal editors, and it can help them prioritize what to read. So they might look through the articles published in the latest issue of a journal, see the altmetric data for it, understand what is really getting traction amongst that broader audience. And of course, these challenges faced by authors tie very closely to the challenges that publishers themselves face. So of course, you'll want to make your journals or your book collections as informative and as relevant as possible. But making those informed strategic decisions without the right data or as much data as you can possibly get can be difficult. Altmetrics can help with this. They can help you add value for readers, authors, and subscribers by providing that additional context around how a piece of research is being received and used and interpreted. They can help you attract and keep the best authors. So particularly in the age of open access, this is a big problem for publishers. How can we get the best people publishing with us and help them see value from the money that they're spending to do so? Equally important for publishers is demonstrating the importance of the content that they're publishing. There's so much research out there these days. How do you make yours stand out? Closely aligned with that, of course, is the need to create engaging marketing campaigns so that people quickly see the messages or the findings of the research that you're publishing and can be enticed to click through further or read other content from the rest of your publications. And of course, publishers are always keen to support the research communities which they exist for. By being able to align your goals with those of the communities that you serve, you'll be able to further the research and the initiatives in that field. So altmetrics can really help you understand and help your audience understand how a piece of research is being interpreted. They can be used to report back to authors and editorial boards without having to wait that time span of years for citations to get a sense of how something has been received. They can help you measure the success of any outreach and promotional activity that you do. They can help you quickly identify hot topic content and guide future strategy. A particularly powerful element is being able to look over a long period of time to see how trends have evolved or new data points seem to be emerging and jump on those topics or figure out how they might fit into the future of your journal. You might, for example, and Sarah will talk about this later, look to publish special issues or even launch a new title in a specific field. And of course, adopting something which isn't necessarily so rooted in such traditional academic peer-to-peer conversations helps you demonstrate the innovation that you're willing to embrace as a journal or a publisher and play a part in those wider conversations, which otherwise you may be missing out on. So how do altmetrics and altmetric in particular actually work? At Altmetric, we look for three things: an output, so that might be a journal article, a data set, a book, an image. an identifier attached to the output, so a unique number that helps us determine exactly which output it is. That might be the DOI, the PubMed ID, an ISBN, a canonical URL, a huge range of identifiers that tell us, okay, this article is written with this one that was published on X date. And then lastly, of course, we need mentions of that output in the source that we track. And the sources that we track vary quite substantially. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of people associate altmetrics with social media, and they do definitely play a part. But also we track mentions to research from a wide range of news outlets, a huge diverse collection of public policy sources from policy organizations around the world, blogs, patents, which is one of our newest sources and we were really excited about. That's resulted in a huge number of references, so you can really see how that knowledge transfer from the academy to a wider commercial application is taking place. Wikipedia, YouTube, where research is mentioned in the comments of videos. The Open Syllabus Project is a source that we added a couple of years ago, which is really specifically about how books are being featured on university reading lists. And that's really powerful for understanding how the monographs that you're publishing are being used to influence today's scholars and future researchers. Post-publication peer review forums and Mendeley, which helps us demonstrate the still the academic impact of the work. And then another recent source that we've added is citations from Dimensions. So it's really nice because this helps you tell that more complete story. You can see the broader attention and engagement that research is receiving amongst audiences beyond the academy, as well as what's going on and the conversations that are being had between researchers and the feedback that they're giving on the research that has been done. So in terms of how collating all of this attention together actually works, we follow a list of domains. So this tends to be, for example, publisher websites or institutional repositories even perhaps. And then we search for links to those domains in the attention sources that we track. So for example, we'll always see all of the news stories from the BBC News website. Our system scans them all for links to nature.com. It then will follow those links to see which article they end up on. It can disambiguate across different versions of the article. So for example, if it's hosted on nature.com, but also lives in an institutional repository, where possible, we will merge them together so we collate the attention, you can see it all in one place. And then we push it out and display it through the Altmetric details pages, which hopefully some of you are familiar with. This is what you see if you click on the badges on publisher sites. And within the details pages, you can explore all of the original mentions. The Altmetric donut is something that hopefully many of you will be familiar with. This is our proprietary visualization and algorithm. The donut is designed to give an at-a-glance indicator of the type and volume of attention that an item has received. So you'll hopefully be able to see here the colors of the donut change to reflect the sources which we found attention for an item in. So for example, if you see a lot of light blue, like here on the left, that means it's been mentioned in a lot of tweets. Red, for example, is always news. Yellow is always blogs. And then the number in the middle is what we call the Altmetric attention score. Now, really importantly, the score isn't a measure of quality, and it's not just a straight count of the number of mentions that we've seen for something. It's actually a weighted count that takes into consideration, yes, how much attention or how many mentions we've seen, but also who the author of those mentions were and the source that they're from. And that's really designed to try and reflect the likely reach of the attention, but also to account for any bias that might seep in. So, for example, a lot of journal accounts now will have Twitter accounts for a journal. And so what we do if we see an account tweeting the same domain and only that domain a lot is we weight it slightly lower. So what we're really trying to do is reflect genuine broader attention and engagement to help give you a sense of what is really getting a lot of traction online or what perhaps could do with an extra boost. So not a measure of quality, but it does give an interesting way to kind of compare and understand the different interactions that are taking place around individual research outputs. So the journal badges are perhaps how most of you have come across our data so far. They're currently available on thousands of journals. The data behind these badges updates in real time, and as I mentioned, they provide that really nice at-a-glance summary of online attention. Many publishers, like you can see here on Taylor and Francis Online, will put the badges alongside citation counts or perhaps downloads of the article to help you build that more complete picture of the impact or the influence that a publication is having. We also have the Altmetric Explorer platform, which I think some of you on this webinar certainly will have access to. The Altmetric Explorer enables you to search for the attention across all of the outputs that we've ever tracked. I think at the moment it's more than 10 million, so there's a huge amount of data there. You can do things like search by keyword, by journal title, by publisher. You can see highlights of who has been engaging with a specific set of research outputs the most. You can dig into individual research outputs and explore the mentions for each of them. You can see trends over time. You can see demographics, so where in the world is something being mentioned. You can explore the mentions themselves in detail. So if you want to see for your journal, for example, all of the mentions that it's ever got from the Huffington Post, you could do that, or from a specific policymaker, might be particularly interesting. And then you can compare journals. So you can see for others in your field, perhaps, how do you perform against each other, which journals are really attracting a lot of attention, and then you can dig further into the data to figure out a bit more about how they're doing that, how they're achieving that. And then, of course, you can do things like save searches and set up email reports to receive all of the latest notifications straight to your inbox. So I think one last thing from me before we move on to Sarah's part is we really would encourage you to be responsible. Altmetrics are an indicator. They're by no means the full story. Certainly this top level that you see here in the badge, it's really important to be clicking on the donut and looking through the mentions to understand where something is getting attention from and why. It could be getting a lot of attention for a negative reason. You know, there might be a funny comment that was left in the footnotes, or people might even be debating the findings. We'll often see that retracted articles, for example, have a very high altmetric attention score because they've generated a lot of controversy. Altmetrics, or any metric, of course, can never be used in a standalone way. They're there to complement expert opinion, and no number will ever replace actually reading the paper and making your own informed opinion. So we really do encourage you to look beyond the numbers and dig into the data, and not least because that's where the interesting stories really are. So with that, I will hand over to Sarah.
Right. Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining today. Just to give you a little bit of background on me and the context with which I'm taking you through these slides. So I used to be a publisher. I spent about 9 years being a publisher. I launched 2 big journals, Scientific Reports and Helium, which is Elsevier's mega journal. And I had a stint between these 2 things, running a number of niche neuroscience titles at Elsevier. And so what I've tried to bring into this is certainly some of the frustrations or some of the challenges that I myself felt as a publisher. And I think more and more, a lot of those challenges really are about making those informed business decisions that Kat talked about at the beginning. So I just want to quickly recap what some of these publishing challenges are, and really use these to focus specifically on the Altmetric Explorer in terms of how we can use the Explorer to help us deal with some of these. And I think the first one here is the most obvious one just to talk through, and this is this making informed business decisions. And for publishers, there are just so many different pressures now. I think all of us are getting more and more pressure to launch new journals that are actually going to be able to generate content and generate meaningful content and work with the existing portfolios that we have. A way complicates things. I think we're all probably thinking, what is Plan S going to do? And as the publisher landscape changes, there's more and more need to use data to drive a lot of these business decisions. Adding value is, of course, an absolutely huge one, and readers, authors, and subscribers, as we know, they're all the same people wearing different hats at different times, and it's really important that we try and create a community around our journals for these individuals. And that directly links, of course, to attracting and keeping the best authors. If we're able to provide that value, people will want to continue to publish with our journals. And I think that with the next one, demonstrating the importance of content, that's really thinking about all of the different things that Kat has already talked about, and really asking ourselves, how do we demonstrate the importance of content beyond the impact factor? And we know from what authors tell us that the impact factor is, of course, still the #1 driver of where they choose to submit to, but we need to find new and better ways to show context outside the impact factor. And of course, creating engaging marketing campaigns, that's a big one, and supporting research communities. That's really about aligning ourselves with the goals of the research communities and making sure we're supporting their needs. So thinking about the research assessments that a lot of academics are going through. And again, going back to new ideas about what impact means. So I'm specifically going to focus on 2 of these. I'm going to focus on making informed business decisions and attracting and keeping the best authors, because I think that these 2 absolutely go hand in hand. So some of the more, the bigger business decisions that I think the Altmetric Explorer can really help with are around looking at your journal scope and thinking about whether or not to change it, looking at areas to launch new journals in. I know myself from previous experience that publishers are quick to launch new journals and not so quick to close underperforming journals. If we get the content right in the first place, we shouldn't have to make those difficult decisions. Really looking at competitor analysis, again, not just looking at impact factors and publication volume, but also looking at underlying data. Looking at how we can commission content and finding new ways to find new authors, and really thinking about the emerging and changing trends within a given field. So hopefully I'll cover some of those things. And so what I actually want to do is really use the Altmetric Explorer itself to go through some of these examples. So I'm pretending here that I'm the publisher of a series of journals within medical microbiology, or I could just be the publisher of one very large, very important journal. And what we really want to do here is be able to look at changes in the field over time. Let's say we've got a series of journals, we've got lots of competitor journals in the field. There are, of course, big bucket open access journals that are stealing a lot of the content from the more niche journals. And what we really want to do is see what's changing over time, not just looking at publication output, but also seeing what's happening, for example, with attention. If this is a field where we're all starting to see that, okay, we're not getting as much content as we used to, is that because this content's just not as relevant or as interesting as it used to be? Now, in the case of medical microbiology, this is a really fun example because it covers, I say fun, it's a poor use of words, it covers awful things like Ebola, but it's a great example because there is so much happening within the field of medical microbiology. It covers virology, vaccinology, immunology, all of those fields. But what you can certainly see over time is this level of attention just keeps going up and up and up. And you can certainly see this is still a field that's getting a tremendous amount of buzz. And what we can also see here is if we look at all of the different types of attention that Kat alluded to, there's a lot going on. I'm not necessarily going to focus on Twitter. We could sort of say some of that is noise. But for example, if we look at the sheer number of policy documents coming out of this field, this number is staggering. And the same if we go to the patent data. And that's where you really see the practical implications of the research that's being done within this field. So we can look at this data. We can see, okay, there's still a huge amount going on within this very, very broad field. But to make use of this information, I really need to go a lot more granular. So I'm actually going to put on a filter by year. So I'm going to put in it, I just want to see what's going on in 2018 here. If I'm reliant on impact factor, I actually have to obviously wait 2 years to see what's going on. I have to wait 2 years to see where my competition's going, who's publishing a lot, who's getting a lot of attention, what's going on. This is giving me a much more immediate response in terms of other types of impact. And what I've done here is I've also changed my view. I was on highlights, so this button that my cursor's over here. Now what I'm actually looking at is journals. And one thing I want to say here is that Altmetric Explorer also includes the bioarchive. And I'm hoping everyone on this call is familiar with the bioarchive, but if not, this is a preprint server. And it's a preprint server that, as the name suggests, covers all of the fields of biology, and they do show altmetric attention. And what you can see is preprints in the bioarchive are getting a huge amount of attention within this field. And a lot of that is coming from Twitter, but there's a huge amount being written up in blogs, in Facebook, in Google. It's too early really to see the patent and the policy mentions, but you're certainly seeing that there's some very interesting work here. The other thing that I'm going to take notice on this is that I can see here that mega journals are also getting quite a bit of attention, and I'd be curious to understand why they are getting more than most of the more niche specialized journals. Journal of Virology, though, is doing extremely well here and really managing to get that quality, ideally, the news mentions that come out of this. So what I want to start to actually look at here is, why is the Journal of Virology doing well? What are they publishing that's getting attention? And are they publishing authors that I myself might like to approach? Is the attention more negative attention? I'm not really sure what's going on here. I know that this is a competitor journal. I'm actually going to start to dig a little deeper and see what's happening under the hood. So the number one paper here that has the highest Altmetric score for this journal, it's a score of 90. It's quite high given it was published only this year. I'm only looking at 2018. I can see here it's in the top 5% of all research outputs scored by Altmetric. I can see exactly where these mentions are coming from, and I can see how it rates against a much larger body of literature. I can also look at this author list and maybe ponder whether or not I think, given that the work is, this study broadly is about a protein that's important for, potentially going to be important for HIV treatment. If this is something that's in the scope of my journal, I may look at this article, look at the fact that it's been taken very seriously, and think to myself, do I actually want to try and engage with these authors? Am I seeing other trends in this dashboard, which I have unfortunately obscured to show you the details page, but am I seeing trends by subject area within this field? Am I seeing trends by authors? Is there anything within here that's making me go, these are people, or there are people, or there is an area that I would like to think about for a special issue, for a review article, or anything else that pops out of me? Because what this is giving me for the top journal in this field is a really granular look at what's going on within their content. So what I've actually done here, because my initial search was quite high level, is thinking about that paper, that highly mentioned paper that came from the Journal of Virology. It was on HIV or a potential treatment. I'm going to further drill down into my search by putting HIV into this edit search box. Because what I want to do here is, I've seen this paper, it's got a lot of attention, and I'm looking at it thinking, I need a special issue pipeline. It's a very, very cluttered field, or I need to write some really hard-hitting reviews that are going to help my journal increase its impact factor. What's going on with HIV? Is this a field that's still getting enough attention to make it relevant? Now, attention is still pretty strong. It's gone down a little bit. I mean, it doesn't have a full year for 2018, but even tracking 2016 was the peak, then it went down a little further. There's a couple of different things I might actually think here, and one of them is knowing the time lag that exists between when people tend to publish journal articles and then when they might be interested in writing a book. I could actually look at this and go, is now a really good time, given that this field has settled a little bit, to think about going to my book colleagues and saying, would you be interested in this as an area for book acquisition? And HIV is just one example. I think that you can also do some really, really interesting analysis on the social and health sciences using this particular part of the dashboard, just to look at the time lag between when an area was extremely hot and popular and how that lag has dropped off. But again, just a couple of things I would draw out here. And the first thing is this huge number of policy documents that link back to this content, and again, the patents. And I think this is where, historically, we look at the impact factor, we think about one type of impact. What this is showing us is that there are a number of different forms of impact that these papers are really bringing through into the research community and the broader community. So yeah, what we need to do with all of this is just look at it and think, what's going on within my subject area broadly? Given all of this, what does this mean and what are the implications? And the other thing you could do with a trend like this is perhaps this is the perfect time to start writing some really strong reviews, because you've clearly had a glut of publications, and what you want to do now is think about how you can package those up. And of course, just going back to the point about policy, policy mentions have been going up and up and up and up over time. There were a couple of peaks, but it does look now like this is dying down a little bit. So you can definitely see the trends going on under the data. So one thing I just want to quickly go back to is I showed you very briefly that the bioarchive is in Altmetric Explorer. And what some publishers are starting to think about is how can they actually use the bioarchive as a tool for commissioning content. So all of this content hasn't yet, well, most of this content, as far as we know, hasn't yet been published. We would need to check. But what you have here is an indication of, for example, if we take this first article here, or preprint, I should say, this preprint already has a huge amount of attention behind it. If I am thinking about different ways that I can start to get new content or approach new authors, this is basically giving me a dashboard of individuals that we could approach and articles that are potentially hypothetically looking for a home. And so for those of you who do already have the Altmetric Explorer, I would really encourage you to start playing around with the bioarchive and the data that is in here from the bioarchive, and just start to think about how you can use that preprint data to really help drive your acquisition strategy. And the other thing here is, this is one subject area. There's 611 research outputs that come under medical microbiology. If you were looking at a relatively new field, let's say you're looking at CRISPR, for example, and I have CRISPR examples coming up, and you saw that there were 1,000 research outputs in the last 6 months in the bioarchive, that to me would suggest that that is a prime research area looking for journals. And that is an area where you could say, should we do a special issue? Should we actually launch a new journal based on the fact that the bioarchive is giving us a sense of what will be coming out soon? Okay, so I do think that there are also ways that the Altmetric Explorer can start to give you a sense of new areas that you can launch new journals in. And that is by looking at what's happening over time with attention. I'm cheating a bit by choosing CRISPR because we all know that there's been a huge amount written about CRISPR, but that's what makes it so fun. And what you can very, very, very clearly see here is this huge upward trend. If we actually plotted this and just did the trend line in mentions about CRISPR. And coming up into 2018, you do of course have a massive CRISPR debate over who owns the patents to it that many of you may be following. But you also see that there is a lot going on within the field, and it might be worth thinking about how publishers can engage more with that. So what I also did there was just looked at the news. So in this previous slide, I've got all types of attention. Here, oops, sorry, wrong way. Here I'm actually just looking at news because I want to start to break down that attention and try and filter out some of the noise. So I've got rid of my social media mentions. I'm just looking at news, and I see that it's still getting a huge amount of attention here. So this is definitely an area to investigate further. If I'm going to think about a new journal, I obviously need to see what else is being published. And if it turns out that there's a massive glut of journals already in this field, I'm probably going to walk away from it. Interestingly though, what I see with CRISPR is that bioarchive once again comes out #1, then we've got Nature, then we've got all of these other journals, and they're all pretty broad, to be honest. It's very hard to find anything in here apart from nucleic acid research that's particularly granular in its scope. And you can scroll down. Here, of course, I'm limited in what I can actually show you. But if I was doing a live demo and we got to +1 and we kept going and going and going, what you would actually see is that there is a huge number of journals below this, and it's hard to find those more specific journals. So the other thing is that all of these journals are getting a huge amount of attention. They look like they're doing really well in terms of visibility. This is definitely an area that I would want to be looking into a lot more deeply, either for a special issue or for a new journal. And you can see the bioarchive, there's 233 research outputs in there. That is exactly where I would start to try and find the content that I would want to commission. So let's say I actually decided to go ahead and do a special issue on CRISPR. What I need to know is who I actually need to get to write it. And the same applies if I'm writing a review or if I'm commissioning a review. If I'm commissioning a review in particular or a special issue and I need a guest editor, I want big names. And the easiest way to find big names is to look at impact, look at citations, and look at attention scores. And so all I've done here is a very, very simple search. I've looked for articles with the keyword containing CRISPR, and I've looked at the research outputs that correspond to that. I haven't had to filter on anything else. This is already set to altmetric attention score. It's showing me the highest first, and I now see this in order. What this is giving me, and if I know my subject area well, I can scan this and already start to see the papers that might be of interest, is this is going to give me a short list of the hard-hitting authors that could either write for me or edit for me or be on my editorial board or whatever the case may be, whose papers are getting a lot of attention, and they're likely to be the big names in the field that I really need to find. And I think if I know my field well enough, I will actually start to be able to pick off some of these articles and bring together a lot of the links between the articles. And of course, the other thing is, if I've launched a new journal, I need to be able to market my new journal. So what I would actually do is showcase the altmetric scores of a lot of the research that's been published. Now, I've had to take a journal as an example, and I've chosen the journal Nucleic Acids Research because we know that it's getting high attention scores. If this was a brand new journal, it wouldn't get an impact factor for a couple of years. But what you can already see here is many examples of very high altmetric scores. And, you know, if this was my journal and it was brand new, I would be putting this all over my website to make potential authors understand that whilst we don't yet have an impact factor of over 5, there are some really, really good up-and-coming papers that are showing that this is a journal that deserves to be taken seriously, assuming, of course, that it's positive impact and not negative impact, which in this case I'm going to assume that it is. So the other thing that you can do is really start to look at what's going on with your competitors. So this journal in red is a journal that I actually used to manage, Neuropharmacology. And this is just a very quick example just to show I've done my own search that I've created myself very easily using this edit search button. And what I've been able to do is pull out all of the competitor journals. And this is, along with citations and along with published output, just going to start to guide me and show me for the year of 2018 how my journal is doing against those competitors. I could go into this with a lot more detail, but I'm quite conscious of time. But again, for those of you who have access to the Explorer, I encourage you to really start thinking about playing around with your journal versus other journals in your field. And you can really see, particularly if you look at policy or if you look at patents, you can really start to draw connections between your journal and the output and how you compare to competitor journals. So I just want to quickly go back to something I said before with the CRISPR example, and that's using the Explorer to showcase new journals. So this journal here that I have done an example on, Nature Sustainability, this journal, it's a real journal. It launched in January this year. It will not get an impact factor probably until June 2020, I would guess. For a lot of authors, then they really have a hard time deciding where to publish if a journal's relatively new. And again, altmetric is one other way of showing impact, but I think it's a really important way of showing impact. And I would really encourage you to start thinking creatively about how you can use these scores as very early indicators of success and how you can showcase those to the community that your work is appropriate for. So there are a number of other things that the Explorer can answer. I'm going to skip them in the interest of time and just show you one final thing, and that is just going back to this list of what the publishers' challenges are and how we can support the academic community. And that is just to quickly show you an example of what policy documents look like over time. So obviously, of course, the research is done. We tend to think of it as publishers in terms of what are the citations going to be, how does it contribute to the impact factor. The article goes into the author's ref report or whatever it is. I just want to take a moment to also show what happens beyond the ref, beyond the impact factor, beyond the citations. And that is to show you an article that was published in 2008. And this article has been cited in 4 different policy documents over a 10-year period. I found this example very, very quickly. I think there are probably thousands of others out there that have much higher mentions of policy documents. But what I really like here is the fact that this is showing impact well past the point of publication. Because publications don't just stop 2 years after when the impact factor comes out. For the author, the implications of their work just keeps going and going and going. And so just Also, maybe ponder a little bit about how you can show that lasting impact and legacy of the researcher's work that's been published in your journal, and I think it's something that we should really be proud of and try and showcase as and when we can. And I'm going to leave it there. Go back to Kat.
Thanks very much, Sarah. I hope you all got some really useful examples from that. Please, again, if you have any questions or any comments, pop them in the question box and we will go through them at the end. I'm just going to talk fairly quickly now about maximising the reach and influence of your content, with a particular focus on how marketing teams have and could use the data. So you've hopefully now got a much better understanding of what altmetrics are, how they can be applied, how they should be read, but they can really help you see not just who have been your past audiences, which you might already know via your editorial boards, for example, but who is actually reading your research now, who is talking about it right now, today, tomorrow, next week even. They can help you see who are the other stakeholders with whom you need to engage, who's talking about other journals in the field that you should perhaps consider reaching out to, or are there channels where you haven't yet got a presence that it would really make sense to be. It gives you a new opportunity to think about how you define the impact related to your publications and the communications that you do. What is it that you're trying to achieve by promoting an article or publishing a certain special issue, and to what extent have you achieved those goals? And by looking at what's going on across your field or in other titles, they can help you determine what are the information pathways to increased impact. How do you get your content noticed, and how do you ensure it reaches the right people? Just a couple of examples of what different publishers have been doing. So Taylor and Francis are a great shining example of altmetric use, really. They do an awful lot in this space. They do a really nice thing, a lot on Twitter we see from them. So a weekly check on trending articles and promotions, and this is within specific fields as well as across their portfolio. You'll often see individual Taylor and Francis journals tweeting perhaps their top 5 articles, their top 10 papers, and they've even gone so far as to build a microsite and a special landing page to promote their top articles of the year. And it's really nice for just showing other potential readers what's current, what's getting a lot of attention, what's generating a lot of conversation, and encouraging them to take a look as well. And also identifying the stories that are having a big impact in the news and therefore might be of broader interest. Within the Explorer, I think Sarah's done a great job of showing you the more extended functionality, but one of the really useful things you can do is compare not just at the journal level perhaps, but also at the publisher level. So you can see perhaps within a specific discipline even, where is Springer Nature getting a lot of attention in comparison to, for example, Wiley or whatever size publisher you would like to do. And within that, you can see, okay, not just they're getting X amount of attention, but who are the influencers who are really driving that attention? Where are they engaging? What kind of things are they saying? So that you can start to build your own research strategies and identify people who you might want to build relationships with, whether that's people on Twitter or bloggers or policymakers perhaps. Springer Nature do another really nice thing as subject-specific stars campaigns, where they make the effort to track and feature top cited, top downloaded, but also top mentioned content from a mixture of journals. And I think the really nice benefit of this is that, of course, you get to showcase not just the research that's perhaps very academically impactful, but also that is attracting attention from a wider range of stakeholders or engaged audiences. There might be papers, for example, that attract a lot of attention from patient groups. Of course, there is humanities and social science research in there as well, particularly around the times of elections and things. You'll see the attention trends change, and perhaps older articles that have really poignant things to say about how we have evolved as a society, or the interactions that go on amongst different nations and different political groups, and how those evolve and how they're engaging with them. In this example, we looked at the Endocrine Society, who had recently launched a new journal, the Journal of the Endocrine Society. They noticed a really sharp increase in the readership, and they wanted to understand why. So they went into the Explorer to look at news mentions and social media shares in particular. They found one article that really stood out that had been driving a lot of their engagement. And this engagement, of course, was happening a long time before any citations would accrue and would otherwise perhaps have gone unnoticed. And they were really able to correlate that broad kind of global attention to the increased readership and use the traction that that article had got and being able to see where it had been picked up and was getting that engagement from to inform future distribution and dissemination strategies. So, for example, you might see that articles in a particular field or on a certain topic are getting attraction from particular Facebook groups, maybe patient groups or other advocacy organizations. So you might want to alert them to publications when you're publishing another article on a similar topic later on. There are lots of different ways you can look at this data, understand who the influencers in a certain area are, and then reach out to them. Of course, Sarah mentioned about how you can use altmetrics to attract new authors or potentially identify authors. But a really important thing to do, of course, is demonstrate your commitment to engaging with that broader audience and show yourselves to be innovative and up to date with the latest topics and the latest discussions in the field. So we've seen an increasing amount of publishers not just adopting altmetrics, but then showcasing the fact that they've done so. So listing it, the fact that they provide this immediate feedback and extra information for authors in their reasons to publish lists, making some nice adverts for their home pages, showcasing those top 5, top 10 lists, using the data in email campaigns, just to show a different aspect of how the research is being received and what might be interesting for people to read. And of course, there are publishers who are using the data to help elevate their portfolios and to conduct more effective reputation management. So that has involved things like, particularly for Duke University Press, running Wikipedia editathons with faculty editors, providing evidence of just even the value of their publications. So particularly relevant to the humanities and social sciences for the journals that don't have impact factors, like Sarah was mentioning, demonstrating that early impact or even that ongoing impact of a journal that doesn't necessarily feature in citation reports can be really powerful for attracting new readers, new subscribers, and new authors. And of course, they're using the Explorer to monitor for potential negative attention. So perhaps particularly of interest to press officers or comms officers, if you're working with them. Altmetrics can flag up any issues very early on and help you jump in and mitigate any negative or misinterpreted facts that may be circulating. Things spread very quickly on social media, and it's really good to be aware of what is going on and be able to step in where you need to. Michigan Publishing, who we've worked fairly extensively with, had a really interesting use case with the data around many of their books. So I mentioned earlier that one of the sources that we track is the open syllabus data, and this shows you where a book is featured on institutional reading lists around the world. They had a really interesting case where they came across this older book, which they had assumed wasn't really used very much, was aimed at quite a specific audience. But what they actually found was that this book was being used by 13 institutions in their reading lists. And this led to them completely rethinking how they perceived and how they saw the future for this book. Provided them with the idea to reissue it, to do an updated version, and to reach out to more institutions. So there's a real opportunity here to say, okay, to potential subscribers, this many institutions are using this book, it's a really important piece of literature, you might want to consider it as well. So I hope those brief examples were useful. Just a few quick points on where next. You might be thinking, where can you get started with all of this data? You can, of course, as we mentioned, find the altmetric badges on thousands of journal pages. I think most of you will probably find it somewhere on the pages of the journals that you edit or that you work on. If you do have access to the Explorer, we would definitely encourage you to go in there and take a look around. If you're not sure if you have access, we'd encourage you to talk with your managing editor or email us at support.altmetric.com. And you can, of course, check out the Altmetric site for lots of useful tips and tricks. We've got some really nice guides for editors on there, different suggestions for how you can use the data, and examples, of course, of what other people have done. So with that, I think we will go to the Q&A. So please do pop any questions that you have in the question box, and we will do our best to answer them. Okay, one for you then, Sarah. What do you think is the most useful thing that Altmetrics showed you as an editor that you hadn't seen before?
To be honest, the most useful thing, which unfortunately didn't exist at the time, is the bioarchive content. That is enormously valuable. It's giving you such an early indication of what's going to be coming out next, especially if you search it by 2017 only or 2018 only. And I think that there's so much that people can get out of that data. So really, really encourage people who have the Explorer to get stuck into the bioarchive content and see what you can do with it.
Okay.
And actually, another question that I've been asked is, will there be other preprint service added?
Yes, in fact, we already have lots of other ones. So we have Archive. I'm going to forget the list now of all the ones that we have. We have SSRN. We have all sorts. It's not by no means limited to biological research. So there's a huge range of data there. And you'll hopefully have seen from what we've shown you that this really isn't just for articles. It isn't just for journals. We have data for books, we have chapters, we have data sets, we have images. So it can really help you get a much better understanding of the attention that's going on across a field and the activity that's taking place beyond just a journal, and feed that into your strategies and your outreach campaigns. Okay, it looks like we have no more questions for today, so I think we will leave it there. Thank you very much to everyone for joining. We will send an email round with the recording, and we invite you, of course, to get in touch with us if you have any further questions, have questions about how to get access, or would like to find out more about how your journal can make use of the data, or Altmetrics platforms and other tools. Thanks very much, everybody.